A calm Tuesday afternoon in Tucson unraveled everything Teresa Mann thought she knew. She was folding Dean's blue button-down shirt, the one he wore to parent-teacher conferences and date nights, when his laptop lit up on the nightstand. A message preview appeared. The bipolar angle will hold up if she reacts the way we expect. That was her name. That was her name, and that was a lie. She had never been diagnosed with anything like bipolar disorder. But Dean had been dropping hints lately, calling her emotional, unstable, irrational. Now she saw it clearly. Those weren't concerned comments from a loving husband. They were breadcrumbs in a setup. Suspicion gripped her chest. This wasn't just cheating. This was something calculated. This was betrayal wearing a mask. Teresa didn't close the laptop. She didn't back away. She sat down. If Dean was planning something, she needed to know. Teresa Emlyn had always seen herself as dependable, kind, and quietly strong. At 45, she had spent nearly 2 decades building a life in Tucson, with her husband Dean and their 2 children, Katie, 16, and Ryan, 14. She worked part-time as a veterinary technician at a local animal clinic, a job she loved for its simplicity and sense of purpose. The income wasn't much, but it gave her a connection to the world beyond their home. Dean never saw it that way. As the primary breadwinner and a successful construction project manager at Gravora Group, he constantly reminded her, subtly and not so subtly, that her job was little more than a hobby. They met 20 years ago at a backyard barbecue in Phoenix. Dean had been charming and attentive, the kind of man who held open doors and made promises about forever. He brought her flowers, made her laugh, and talked about a future filled with shared dreams. When he proposed after 2 years of dating, Teresa had said yes without hesitation. The early years of their marriage felt like everything she had hoped for. They bought their first home, traveled to the Grand Canyon and Mexico, and talked excitedly about starting a family. When Katie was born, Dean cried in the delivery room. When Ryan followed 2 years later, he took a week off work just to be home. But somewhere along the way, things shifted. Dean began to assert more control over their finances. It started with, "I'll handle the bills so you don't have to worry," and evolved into, "Why did you buy this without asking me?" Teresa brushed off the change at first, thinking it was about responsibility, not control. But it became clear that Dean wanted more than just financial leadership. He wanted financial ownership. Every credit card was in his name. Every major decision required his approval. Her name was on the mortgage, but she wasn't allowed to see the bank statements. Dean didn't like surprises. He didn't like her friends either, especially Jennifer, Teresa's college roommate and closest confidant. "She fills your head with feminist nonsense," Dean would say. Eventually, phone calls to Jennifer became less frequent, and invitations to meet for lunch stopped altogether. Teresa told herself she was just busy with the kids, with the house, with life. But the truth was, she'd been slowly cut off from anyone who might tell her that something was wrong. After 6 years out of the workforce, Teresa returned to her job at the animal clinic. It was only part-time, 3 days a week, but it was hers. Dean didn't approve. He never forbade her, not directly, but he complained more, about the house being messier, about dinner being late, about having to pick up the kids from school or help with homework. He made offhand remarks about how she seemed tired lately, how she forgot things, how she seemed overwhelmed. "You used to be so organized," he'd say. Or, "Are you sure you're okay, Teresa? You don't seem like yourself anymore." At first, she believed he was concerned, but over time, the questions felt like accusations. The compliments became backhanded, and the concern became control. Now, standing in their master bedroom with a half-folded shirt in her hands, staring at that chilling email notification on Dean's laptop, it all made sense. The comments, the criticisms, the pressure to quit her job, the subtle isolation. It wasn't random. It was part of a larger pattern. What she had thought was a partnership was something else entirely. 18 years of marriage hadn't been built on trust. They'd been built on careful manipulation. And Teresa, the woman who used to trust so easily, was finally beginning to see clearly. With her breath shallow and her fingers trembling, Teresa clicked on the email. It opened to a thread of messages between Dean and a law firm named Harrison & Associates. One folder stood out, Exit Plan Confidential. Inside it were dozens of attachments, Mails, spreadsheets, text messages. Each document revealed another layer of deception. Each message pulled the rug further out from beneath her. The first email she read was titled, "Custody Strategy." Harrison had written, "The bipolar angle will be key. We need more documentation of erratic behavior. Can you provoke some incidents?" Teresa's heart stopped. Dean had been pushing her lately, picking fights over meaningless things, standing back calmly while she grew frustrated, accusing her of overreacting. Now she understood. He wasn't concerned. He was collecting evidence. Another email thread outlined a timeline for filing divorce. The date was December 15th, just before the holidays. Harrison called it optimal for emotional destabilization. Dean agreed, writing, "She won't see it coming." He added a cruel postscript. "This pathetic cow will be living in a trailer when I'm done." Teresa stared at the words, stunned. The man she'd loved for 18 years thought she was disposable. He was orchestrating her downfall in secret. There were spreadsheets tracking their joint savings, but most of the money had been moved to accounts she didn't recognize. Harrison congratulated Dean on asset shielding. They had receipts for things Teresa had never bought, suggesting she was financially irresponsible. And then the texts, ugly, mocking messages between Dean and Harrison, where her attempts at conversation were twisted into signs of instability. He even joked about her folding laundry during his scheme. "Too stupid to hide money properly," one message read. "All she does is clean and nag." Dean had rewritten their entire marriage as a story of a loving husband trapped with an unstable woman. He documented every argument, every sigh, every moment she raised her voice, all twisted into a weapon. This wasn't just a plan to leave. It was a plan to ruin her, take her children, take the house, and leave her questioning her sanity. But the Teresa who sat on that bed wasn't broken. She was awake. She inserted a flash drive into the laptop and began copying everything. Emails, attachments, spreadsheets, screenshots. She photographed the messages with her phone. She zipped the folder and backed it up to the cloud under a secret name. Her movements were calm, calculated. Dean couldn't know she knew. Not yet. When the folder finished copying, she quietly closed the laptop and folded the shirt she'd been holding before. Her heart was still pounding, but her mind was clear. She needed help, someone who understood the law, someone outside Dean's circle. But first, she needed to disappear emotionally, to shrink back into the Teresa Dean thought she was, because if he suspected she was preparing for war, he'd strike faster. And she couldn't let him win. Not after everything he'd already stolen. Teresa sat in her car outside a Phoenix law office, gripping the manila envelope that held the contents of Dean's betrayal. Inside was everything: his emails with Harrison, the financial spreadsheets, the messages calling her a pathetic cow. She had made the drive under her maiden name, paying cash for gas, careful not to leave a digital trail. Her destination was Victoria Summers, a high-pregnant teen had unknowingly complained about in an email. He had called her ruthless and impossible to intimidate. That was all Teresa needed to hear. Victoria's office was warm, but no nonsense, filled with legal books and framed photos of courtroom victories. After reviewing the documents, Victoria looked at Teresa with quiet fury. "This is coercive control. It's litigation abuse. And it's illegal." She laid out the plan clearly. They would collect more evidence, build a financial paper trail, and let Dean make the first move. Then, they'd hit back with everything. Victoria referred her to Dr. Patricia Walsh, a forensic psychologist who specialized in domestic abuse. Teresa met with her under her maiden name, using cash. Dr. Walsh conducted a full psychological evaluation, and after 2 sessions, her words lifted a weight from Teresa's chest. "You are not bipolar," she said gently. "You experiencing complex trauma from years of emotional abuse. That validation, coming from a professional, was like being handed the truth after years of gaslit distortion." Dr. Walsh agreed to testify if needed. Meanwhile, Victoria hired a forensic accountant who traced nearly $200,000, 0 cents Dean had funneled into hidden accounts over the last 2 years. He had used fake expenses, rerouted transfers, and even forged Teresa's name on a few forms. His arrogance had worked in Teresa's favor. He documented everything. Victoria secured an emergency financial hold on the joint accounts, freezing the money Dean thought he could steal freely. They didn't confront him. That was Victoria's strategy. Dean still believed he was in control, and that was the perfect cover. He had no idea Teresa was building a case so airtight it would crush his fabricated narrative. Instead of reacting, she moved in silence. She kept folding laundry. She smiled at dinner. She listened to his lies without flinching, all while preparing her defense. To protect Katie and Ryan, Teresa arranged for them to spend Christmas break with her sister in California. She called it a fun getaway, but in truth, it was a calculated shield from the fallout she knew was coming. Every part of Dean's plan was being quietly dismantled. He had underestimated her completely. He believed the version of her he created, the confused, docile wife who couldn't balance a checkbook. But the woman he was really dealing with was meticulous, intelligent, and now backed by a legal powerhouse and a team of professionals who saw through every one of his lies. Dean still thought she was clueless, but the clock was ticking, and when it struck, he'd have no idea what hit him. On December 15th, Dean came home early with a smug look on his face. He poured himself a glass of wine, sat Teresa down at the kitchen table, and said he needed to talk. He used the tone she'd come to dread, fake concern, coated with superiority. He told her he had filed for divorce, said he was worried about her mental health, and insisted it was better for the kids if she took a break from primary custody until she got help. He acted like he was doing her a favor, like this wasn't a calculated attack. Teresa nodded slowly, her voice calm and measured. "You're probably right," she said softly. "We both want what's best for Katie and Ryan." Dean smiled, believing once again that he held all the power. But Teresa's heart was pounding not from fear this time, but from restraint. She knew her moment was coming. That moment arrived on January 8th, at the preliminary hearing. Dean walked into the courtroom wearing a tailored suit and an air of smug confidence. He didn't see Teresa at First County. He was too busy texting his lawyer, Harrison. But then he looked up and saw Victoria Summers seated beside her. His face changed instantly. Pale, tight-jawed. The realization hit him like a brick. Teresa wasn't alone. She had firepower. The judge entered. Proceedings began. Dean's attorney started with the standard narrative, calling Teresa emotionally unstable, citing episodes of erratic behavior, and asking the court for immediate temporary custody and exclusive access to their marital home. Harrison emphasized concern for the children's well-being. Then Victoria stood up and calmly handed the judge a thick binder labeled Exhibit A, Intent to Defraud and Coercive Control. Inside was everything. The emails between Dean and Harrison laying out the manipulation plan, text messages mocking Teresa and predicting she'd crack under pressure, screenshots of spreadsheets hiding over $200,000, 0 cents in assets, and messages about how to spin. Most of all, crisis from custody advantage. There were also statements from Dr. Patricia Walsh, inflicting coercive syndrome and trauma inflicted by coercive control. A report from the forensic accountant detailed how Dean siphoned money through shell expenses and fake reimbursements, every detail meticulously logged. The binder was color-coded, tabbed, and cross-referenced. It was irrefutable. The courtroom shifted. The judge's expression hardened with each page. Dean tried to speak, but Victoria objected. The judge allowed Dean to respond, but his answers were scattered and defensive. He stammered. He blamed Teresa. Then he said it was all taken out of context, but the context was clear. Dean wasn't a husband trying to protect his children. He was a manipulator, trying to erase a woman who had trusted him for nearly 2 decades. By the end of the hearing, the judge ruled that Dean would undergo a mandatory psychological evaluation. Teresa was granted full temporary custody, exclusive use of the marital home, and a court-ordered freeze on all shared assets until a full forensic audit was completed. As Dean sat in stunned silence, his world collapsing, Teresa didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She didn't gloat. She simply stood, nodded respectfully to the court, and walked out with her dignity intact. She had waited years to be heard, And now, in a courtroom filled with the truth he tried to bury, Dean's lies finally turned to ash. What he meant to use as a weapon against her had become the very rope that unraveled his entire plan. The betrayal had broken her, but the truth built her back stronger. Teresa didn't seek revenge the way Dean expected. There were no screaming matches, no emotional confrontations, no petty attempts to ruin his life. Her revenge was quiet, steady, intentional. Her revenge was reclaiming everything he tried to take from her and building something stronger in its place. Within 2 months of the court hearing, Teresa sold the Tucson house. She used the proceeds, combined with frozen account releases and court-ordered restitution, to move herself and the kids to a smaller but charming home just outside Phoenix. Katie and Ryan each got their own rooms, painted however they liked. The house had a fenced yard, a vegetable garden Teresa had always dreamed of, and peace, real, grounding peace. No more walking on eggshells, no more tiptoeing around moods. She kept her job at the veterinary clinic, commuting a few days a week, but also took on a part-time position at Victoria's law firm, not as an assistant, but as a victim advocate. The same calm, collected strength that carried her through the courtroom now helped other women preparing for similar battles. She sat beside them during depositions. She reminded them, gently but firmly, that they weren't alone. One of the first things Teresa did in her new city was call Jennifer. Her old college roommate picked up on the second ring. They hadn't spoken in over a year, cut off after Dean accused Jennifer of being a bad influence. Jennifer cried when Teresa apologized. Then she drove 2 hours just to hug her in person. They talked until midnight. Teresa laughed until her stomach hurt. For the first time in years, her laughter didn't feel borrowed. Dean, meanwhile, unraveled. The evidence of his financial deception didn't just affect the divorce. Once the forensic accountants submitted their findings to the court, a criminal investigation was opened. Dean had created fake expense reports tied to his company's accounts. He hadn't just hidden money from Teresa, he had embezzled it. The district attorney pressed charges for financial fraud. Harrison, his attorney, faced sanctions for knowingly aiding in the custody manipulation scheme. His reputation plummeted. Clients dropped him. His firm suspended him indefinitely. Dean tried to reach out. He called the landline at Teresa's new house. She let it ring. Then she blocked the number. He emailed once, sending a long, rambling message filled with excuses, half-hearted apologies, and veiled requests to start over for the kids. Teresa didn't reply. She forwarded it straight to Victoria. Julia, the young assistant Dean had once bragged about to Harrison, vanished from his life. Whether she left because of the chaos or was never that serious to begin with, Teresa didn't care. Dean was alone now, the weight of his schemes crushing the illusion of control he once held. He wasn't sorry. He was exposed. And Teresa? She rose. She attended therapy weekly, not because she was broken, but because healing was now part of her routine. She signed up for an online course in legal advocacy. Katie joined the soccer team at her new school. Ryan started taking guitar lessons. Their grades improved. They smiled more. Teresa filled their new home with framed art, thrifted finds, and hand-sewn curtains. She grew tomatoes in the backyard. On weekends, she hosted coffee dates for friends, something Dean never let her do. Her world, once small and suffocating, began to bloom again. Every so often, Teresa would hear updates about Dean's legal battles from Victoria. She listened quietly, never celebrating, but never feeling guilt either. He had made his bed. He had tried to turn her trauma into a weapon. He had underestimated her at every turn, and now, every lie he'd told was a stone in the rubble of his own downfall. Teresa never needed to destroy Dean, she just needed to survive him. And in doing so, she became something more powerful than he ever imagined. She didn't have to raise her voice to be heard. She didn't need to scream to be seen. She rebuilt her life, piece by piece, on her own terms. Her revenge wasn't rage, it was resilience. She wasn't a victim anymore. She was a force. And Dean? He taught her how to fight. She just used everything he taught her against him. The day her divorce was finalized, Teresa signed the documents, stood up, and walked out of the courthouse, with her chin high and her heart steady. She no longer carried Dean's last name. She returned to her maiden name, Teresa Milland, not out of bitterness, but because she was finally herself again. The name Dean had tried to erase was now the one she wore with pride. Teresa embraced her new life with the same quiet determination that helped her survive. Her house near Phoenix was filled with light, color, and laughter. Katie painted a mural on her bedroom wall. Ryan built a bookshelf with scrapwood and painted it green. Their new routines were simple: family dinners, homework at the table, movie nights on Fridays. But each one was sacred. No yelling, no fear, just peace. Her weekly therapy sessions became a space of growth, not just recovery. Her therapist didn't just help her process trauma, she helped Teresa rebuild trust in herself. That trust extended outward. Teresa began volunteering at a local women's center, helping others navigate the early stages of coercive control and emotional abuse. She shared her story carefully, never centering the pain at trauma. What followed? The part-time job at Victoria's law office evolved too. Victoria recognized something rare in Teresa: the perfect blend of empathy and precision. Within 6 months, she promoted her to a full paralegal position. Teresa took paralegal certification classes at night while working during the day, driven not by revenge, but by purpose. She was now helping other women fight their own legal battles, from financial discovery to protective orders. Teresa started a blog called Break the Silence, Build the Self. She wrote about emotional gaslighting, how to spot financial abuse, how to document evidence safely, and what legal options exist for women in similar situations. The blog attracted hundreds of readers within weeks. Survivors from all over Arizona reached out to thank her. Some asked for help, some just wanted to be heard. Teresa answered every message. Katie and Ryan adjusted better than she could have imagined. Katie started journaling and joined a school club focused on women's leadership. Ryan became quieter but thoughtful and began writing music. They no longer worried about saying the wrong thing. Their laughter was spontaneous now, not cautious. Teresa watched them every day with gratitude and fierce resolve to protect their peace. Victoria invited Teresa to speak at a local legal empowerment conference. She hesitated at first, unsure if she could share that chapter of her life out loud. But standing on stage, looking out at a room filled with attorneys, advocates, and survivors, Teresa realized something powerful. Pointless, futile. They came from victory. Every motion she filed at work, every support group she sat in, every piece of advice she offered online, it all echoed back to one moment: the email notification on Dean's laptop. She didn't regret finding it. She called it the day she woke up, not because it was the worst day of her life, but because it was the beginning of her best one. The chaos Dean left behind was no longer something she escaped. It was something she transformed. Like compost enriching soil, his destruction had fed her growth. Her home wasn't just safe, it was sacred. Her life wasn't just restored, it was redesigned. And every time she walked through the door of her own house, every time her children smiled without fear, every time she sat beside another woman in court, Teresa Milland knew one thing for certain. She won. Completely. And on her own terms. Dean lost everything he tried to use against her: custody, credibility, the carefully constructed image of the successful, stable man who always provided for his family. When the court rulings came down, his face crumpled, not in shock, but in realization. He wasn't just losing a case, he was being exposed. The narrative he'd built, brick by brick with manipulation and malice, collapsed under the weight of truth. Teresa didn't celebrate. She didn't post online. She didn't send out triumphant texts or shout to the world. She simply continued her life, quietly, with purpose. She watched Dean from a distance, the same way one watches a fire that's finally burned itself out. What she held now wasn't revenge. It was power. Not power from the courts or from money. It was the kind of power that comes from clarity, knowing who you are, and more importantly, who you'll never be again. Katie and Ryan saw every part of the journey, and through it, they learned what strength really looks like, not just in their mother's courtroom victory, but in the way she handled bedtime stories, school drop-offs, and difficult conversations without ever turning bitter. They saw what it meant to walk away from cruelty with grace. Teresa never reopened the folders of emails or the court documents. She didn't revisit the recordings or reread Dean's lies. She kept them stored, legally protected, but emotionally she let them go. She didn't need to hold on to the pain to prove she'd survived it. Her life now was proof enough. She lived forward, not in fear, not in anger, in peace. She gardened on weekends, painted her kitchen yellow, and signed up for a poetry workshop just because she wanted to. She no longer measured her days by crisis or recovery. She measured them in sunlight, in her children's laughter, in the calm she'd reclaimed. A year later, she spoke at a legal empowerment conference for survivors of coercive control. The room was packed with attorneys, counselors, and women just beginning their battles. When Teresa stood at the podium, he didn't read from notes. She exposed himself, and that was all I needed. She wasn't ashamed of what she'd been through, but she no longer let it define her. Her scars weren't wounds, they were warnings, proof of what she'd escaped, and evidence of everything she refused to tolerate again. When she passed a courtroom, she didn't flinch. When someone mentioned the word bipolar, she didn't tense up. The lies Dean tried to weaponize now held no weight, because the truth, documented, defended, and finally believed, had saved her. And every morning, she woke up in her own home, with her name, her peace, and her children safe beside her. That truth kept saving her. Not once, not twice, but every single day. He thought calling me unstable would win him everything, but it cost him everything. My name is Teresa Milan. I survived 18 years of coercive control and walked away stronger than I ever thought possible. He tried to erase me with lies. I wrote the truth into evidence. There was a time when I questioned every emotion I had, when I apologized for being tired, for forgetting a bill, for raising my voice when I was overwhelmed. But I know now, I wasn't irrational. I wasn't broken. I was being broken down, intentionally, methodically, by someone who feared what I could become without him. And when I finally saw through it, I rose in silence and proved what he never wanted the world to see. If someone ever tells you that you're too emotional, too dramatic, too much, look closer. It might be their fear talking, their fear of your strength, their fear that once you realize your worth, you won't need them anymore. They're right, you won't. To every woman who's ever been told to calm down, to shrink, to sit still, don't. Your power is not a weakness. It's a warning. And once it wakes up, it does not go back to sleep. Subscribe to Veiled Fury for more stories of women who rose from betrayal and became unbreakable. Your story isn't over. It's just getting started.